I am here today with Kenadee Clark, who I am delighted to interview. She's a darling girl, the daughter of one of my very best friends, Nikki Sue, that we heard from earlier. And I'm really, really excited to learn from Kenadee about her experiences and thoughts. Because Kenadee, you have a very unique experience with grief and loss. I'll start by sharing how I know you, even though really you don't really know me all that well. So when I was 31, I had just had a baby, and a few days after that was your mom's birthday, and then my birthday is just a few days after your mom's birthday. So I can't remember if she called me or if I called her. I think I called her to tell her that I had a new baby and that I was so excited about that. I knew that she had had you just a few weeks before. Turned out it was about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks earlier. You were born in August, right?
Yep, August 8th.
Okay, so this would have been between October, sometime around October 14th, 15th, because that's when our birthdays are. And my daughter was born on the 10th.
Okay.
Yeah, so my good friend from college had a beautiful new baby girl named Kenadee. The whole world is exciting and beautiful, and you're just the cutest little thing with your blonde hair and your blue eyes, and I called to tell her about my baby that had just been born, and your mom said, "Oh, you haven't heard," because she could tell by my tone of voice. Heard what? And that's when she told me that your dad had actually passed away just a couple weeks earlier. What day did your dad pass away?
October 16th.
Okay, then it had to have been after the 16th that I talked to her, because Hannah was born on the 10th, so my birthday's the 17th. Maybe it was my birthday that I called her. But that stopped me in my tracks, that kind of experience was even possible in the world, right? The most exciting, hopeful, beautiful time in a young mother and young father's life is that sweet, precious baby. And just to know that your mom was without your dad, it doesn't even seem real. And of course, for you, this is all you have known, is life with your mom and the memories or stories or whatever other experiences that you can relate to about your dad. So that's how we're connected. Can we take a step back and just have you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you're doing in your world? I know you have exciting things happening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat today. My name is Kenadee, like she said. I'm 23. I graduated from the University of Utah in May in film production and political science. I did a double major, and that's my whole life basically is working there and making movies, and I love to write and direct my own projects as well. So
and one of those projects on the horizon for you is I understand you're doing a documentary focused on your mom and her widows club.
yeah, that is something I'm writing right now. So it's in the very, very, very beginning, like idea stages, but yeah.
I cannot wait to see where that goes and what comes of that, because that is an amazing story also.
Yeah.
It really it shows a lot about your mom and the kind of person that she is, to have reached out.
She's the best. Yeah, she's the best.
She is amazing, huh?
Yeah.
So Kenadee, tell me about your dad.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. just because I met him, but I didn't know him in a physical sense. I was born on August 8th and he died October 16th. So I was only 6 weeks old when he passed away. So basically all of my knowledge or information of him just is stories, pictures, things that I have heard from other people. So it's kind of like, it's interesting. I feel like you probably have other people come on the podcast that can really be descriptive about the person that they lost and that they loved. But a lot of mine is secondhand information. He, from all accounts, is so wonderful. He was a golfer, tall guy. He's like 6'4", super athletic, very kind, very outgoing. Did you ever meet him?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Yeah, I met your dad once.
You probably have more.
Yeah, and he was handsome. You left that one out. He was handsome. He was all those things you're saying.
Yeah, actually, my friend came over to my mom's house over Christmas break, and some of my college friends, and they wanted to look through my scrapbooks, and they were going through them, and he's in a few of them, and we had his scrapbook out because they were like, "What does your dad look like?" And my friend that is a girl, she was like, "Kenadee, he's so cute. Oh my gosh, he's so handsome." I was like, yeah, I guess. But it was just funny. But yeah, I just a really vibrant and bright person from all accounts. And I feel like I've gotten to know him kind of like in my heart and maybe in more of like a spiritual way that kind of transcends the realms and is just feelings. And I feel that kind of in my soul, just like a vibrant, protective, loving person.
That's really, really amazing. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think like I am a very spiritual person, and I think like, don't get me wrong, there is still like a lot of loss that I think I feel around obviously that situation and not knowing him in a physical sense, but I feel like and I also actually don't I feel like envious of people sometimes that feel they have these big experiences, these big like spiritual experiences or dreams or whatnot of people that they've lost, and feel like I haven't experienced anything like massive, but I do feel like over the years there's been a lot of times in my life, whether that be a difficult time or a joyful time, where I have been able to feel kind of him in my heart, and that's always like a beautiful and cherished experience for me.
So he doesn't feel like a stranger to you?
No, not a stranger. I think at different times in my life, distant, yeah. Depending on how angry I felt towards kind of the situation that occurred or whatnot, but not a stranger. No.
That's really wonderful. And as a person of faith, you connect with him on the spiritual level. So to you, you feel certain that he still exists. He's not just lost to the universe. He's an actual person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like, gosh, I feel like growing up kind of like in the midst of a lot of grief, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on this later. I feel like a lot of the grief was like really delayed in my experience. And so I feel like growing up with a lot of grief, it's like also interesting. I mean, when you're growing up, I think you're just questioning your beliefs in general, right? Do people exist? Does a life after this exist? And so I feel like coupling those together with kind of like trying to figure that out, but then like there feels like there's like stakes, right? Like if that doesn't exist, then that means that like this person doesn't exist in that realm anymore either. So I think like figuring those out together was also an interesting experience.
How did you do that?
I mean, I feel like they kind of go hand in hand, but I feel like I really just have had some undeniable experiences where I've like felt it in my heart and felt it in my life and felt his presence. My mom is very spiritual, very connected, I feel like, to herself and to what she believes in. And so I think that has been a big help. And she's probably a lot more like in tune with that stuff than I am. But yeah.
And I know how desperately she has wanted you to feel connected to your dad and to know him as well as you can through the stories. Does he ever seem like he's just a legend?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like a lot, like, yeah, absolutely. Also because it's like really interesting, like from my perspective, because everybody, I mean, just with anybody, like everybody has a very different perspective of somebody, right? So like
Right.
his high school friends see him as a very different person than my mom sees him as a very different person than my aunt sees him and my grandma. And so kind of like making a hodgepodge of like all those people's stories and perspectives to like create one human is interesting.
That's such an interesting idea, really, because we don't go around gathering perspectives from other people. Tell me what you think about this person over here in the room. Let's all take turns and say what we think
Yeah.
this person is when they're standing right in front of us. We just interact. So that is a really that's a unique. I can almost see him as a cartoon character with these different like patches all over, that represent the different people who form the "this is who he is" idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like trying to like build a person in your head, right? From all these stories that you've heard, the pictures that you've seen, and all of that. So it's interesting.
So, in spite of that, what are some of the things that you have been able to discern are genuine about this relationship you have with your dad or who he is? What are the threads that are continuous, that aren't dependent on a person's stories?
Yeah. I think some of the ones that are the most like meaningful to me, right? Like you wanna, I think just human nature, like you want to be the child of somebody who's like that matters to us, right? Like who our parents are, I think like innately. You want to be, the child of somebody that's kind and generous and genuine. I think the biggest one that is always one of the first things that people say is very service oriented
Hmm.
and just very like would do anything for anybody, which I think is so beautiful. Such a beautiful quality to have as a person. Um, Another one is just very accepting of anybody, no matter circumstance, no matter differences, nothing, just very like open hearted and loving. And the last one I always think is interesting. Everyone always says this, just could walk into a room and talk to anybody in the room, like very outgoing, is standing in an elevator with a bunch of strangers and he's going to be the guy that like says something in the elevator, makes people feel comfortable
Your
and at
mom said
home.
that too. She said he'd be the
Yeah.
guy that would walk in the elevator and come out with five friends, right?
Yeah, people say that all the time. That's like the most one of the most consistent things I feel like people say about him. Just very fun and boisterous and whatnot.
So is that a way that you connect with him? Are you like him in those ways?
I think sometimes, yeah, like it's interesting. I feel like I kind of like ebb and flow into like extrovert, introvert, but there are definitely when I'm like with people I'm comfortable with and we like I can talk to anybody usually in a room. So I do feel like yeah, I do feel connected in that way for sure.
That's that's good. That's wonderful. So as you grew up, at what point did you realize that your family situation was different than other families?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of a almost like a two-pronged answer because I think I always realized it. Like I had moments when I was like 5, 6 that I was like, whoa, this looks very different than what my cousins' families look like. But I feel like when it all came like crashing down on me was when I was probably like 12, when it was like I think from like before 12 I had like a lot of like maybe 11, 12, kind of in that range, like 6th grade. I had a lot of like realizations of like, this looks very different than other people's. This feels very different than other people's families. And there was things I struggled with there, but I feel like they all like compounded when I was like 11 or 12.
Do you know why? Was there an event or something that happened?
I don't think an event. I think I was just the age where I kind of like fully was like completely conscious. Like I was like not like in a childhood fog at all anymore, but I was like, I think, I mean, I think those years of kind of like leading into junior high, kind of tail end of elementary school, is usually when you start to kind of like battle a lot of emotions or anger or like, and I feel like that's kind of what happened for me. They all kind of like bubbled up to the surface at that age.
So did you feel anger? Did you feel
Oh,
angry?
yeah. I feel like I struggled a lot with anger. And I feel like that's something I still like battle a lot. It's interesting. Like different emotions just seem to flare up at different times for me where I'm like, oh, I feel like I've healed that. And then like randomly, like once a year, I'll be like, I still feel something around that event or that emotion.
Well, and that actually connects you with other people who are grieving, because one of the things that we all experience are these waves, right? These triggers that you think, I thought I was over that. Like you said, I thought I was past that. I thought I had resolved that, but it comes back as a wave. So that's interesting that that your grief is similar in that aspect, that you have triggers that come unexpectedly at times. Are there things that are going to be a problem and you have to like mentally manage before you go into the situation?
Yeah, I feel like just obviously any like anniversary or birthday, like usually his birthday, the death date, and then Father's Day. Father's Day usually takes me out the worst. I feel like, especially like with social media, because like everyone's like, my dad's the best ever. And it's like a cute, obviously, totally share that. That's beautiful. But like, it is hard, I think, to look at. Like, it's a poignant reminder of like, that is so cool. You have a dad. I wish I did too, in that same way that you do.
Right. Someone's gain and blessing is a reminder of your loss.
Yeah.
So, and I like how you said, obviously people can share those things, and they should. People have wonderful experiences with their dads. Not everyone.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who have negative experiences with their dads. But if there's something you wish that more people were aware of, especially on social media, what would that be?
I actually saw somebody this year posted it was like a graphic, and it said like Happy Father's Day to everybody who, and then it was like one of them was like has a poor relationship with their dad, has lost a father, like da da da. And I thought that was so sweet to share on social media, to kind of like hold space for that. And I thought that was like, it's not that everyone needs to be sharing that graphic, but like it was sweet that somebody did and was like thinking of people that for even just a moment that maybe had different experiences than they did that day.
How has your experience changed how you interact with other people in their grief, in their hard times?
I think, like I said, just like holding space for those people, not like, I think my mom is really good at that and like has taught me a lot about that. But like, I think my mom is always big on like being consistent with people. She always is like, there's that 2-month mark where people stop showing up. Like they stop texting, they stop bringing meals, they stop leaving flowers, and it kind of drizzles like off. And that's when people need the most support. And so I think being consistent, like after that, I've had a few friends who have lost a parent, a sibling, and hopefully I've done well in showing up for those people. And kind, but I think I don't know. I think once you're like acquainted with loss in such a large way, in such a personal way, it allows you to connect with people. Whereas before, I mean, I guess I've always been acquainted with that. So I don't know, maybe you could speak to that better because you lost your husband a little later, but I feel like it allows you to be just have like a bigger heart in that sense.
I think you're totally right. Because your heart breaks, right? And when it breaks, it opens up. I think this is what I'm visualizing as you're talking. That heart breaks open, but that openness allows you then to actually connect where without that experience of loss, grief, heartache, and there's lots of different kinds of loss and grief. I really don't think people have to have the same experience to be able to empathize and have compassion for each other, because there are universal emotions that come with loss, even in our individual circumstances, right? But I think you're right about that. And so, in a way, it's really a unique experience you have had, that your whole life, your heart has been open to seeing others and to having compassion and empathy for the loss and grief that others are having. It's like it was a gift that you were given right at the very beginning. Why do you think you would have that gift? I would say it's a spiritual gift.
I feel like I always make the joke. I'm like, like I was here for 6 weeks. Like I was like literally on the earth for 6 weeks, and then like the world, like one of the worst things that could happen just happened. Like my whole family was, like taken and then ripped apart, and my dad was like taken from me. So I'm always like, seriously, like 6 weeks in.
Right.
That's brutal. So that's interesting that you spun it and you said it was a gift. Because I don't know. I actually feel like to be completely transparent with you, I feel like I'm kind of in a phase where I'm like, is it a gift? Like what my mom is very in, like we always have been in like very different stages of healing. My mom was obviously like a conscious, like thinking individual for years before I could process anything. And so I think she's years ahead of me on that. And she was kind of in a space where she could like heal a lot of things inside of her before I ever could. And my mom is like very like, trials are gifts, and we learn things and we grow, and she's really thankful for a lot of the things that she's been through. And I'm like completely transparent, like I don't know if I'm like completely there yet, which is like
Well, and that makes sense, right? Because your mom actually has lived long enough to have had trials that she experienced, worked through, resolved, and has moved forward from. So of course it's going to be different, right? And she has multiple experiences that she can fall back on and say, "Oh, that was really hard, but hey, I made it through." But you're still young, and this is major. Most people don't experience this level of major life event as young as you did. And so of course, your experience is going to be different. Like one of the things that I shared earlier on the podcast was my first experience of knowing that God loved me and was listening to me was when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And my brother he was born prematurely in 1977. And at that time, there were only, I think, 5 neonatal centers in the United States. So he was extraordinarily fortunate to be born in a hospital that had a neonatal unit, and he survived. Not all those babies survived back then. And I had prayed and promised God that if he would let my brother live, I would be the best girl I could possibly be for the rest of my life and do whatever he wanted, and every other promise that an 8 or 9 year old would make. And he did live. And so in a way, I started with this foundation of, oh, hard things happen, but God answers your prayers and everything works out fine, and fairy tale ending. But I don't know how I would have been different if he hadn't survived. Right. And so I don't know where to go with that.
No, I think it's interesting. I was actually talking with a friend about this. My friend and I have had very different life experiences, and we have very different perspective on things. Like, I feel like I have had like a bit of an uphill battle with like, I mean, I think whether you're spiritual or not, whether it's God you believe in or the universe or any other source, like you have to develop a sense of trust with that higher power. And I have had such a hard time, I think, doing that throughout my life. Like I'm a skeptic. I'm like a worst case scenario girl.
Yeah,
And
because your early life was a worst case scenario experience.
Right. Yeah. And that's
at least you're consistent.
Yeah, exactly. And my friend is like has had no large traumatic event in her life. And she is like very different, like what I wish I was, in the sense of like just very trusting, believing everything works out for my benefit, like everything is for my good. And we were talking about that, and I had that epiphany. I'm like, well, I view the world that way, I think, because I have experienced my first experience really ever was worst case scenario. Like it did turn out worst case scenario, and it did not turn out for my benefit or my good. And so I think that's something that I have, like, especially now, been battling, trying to like develop that sense of trust with my higher power and myself again, that like I can trust life, I can move forward, I don't always have to panic or retreat or assume that everything is going to go wrong. But the basis of that assumption and that pattern in my life is from that experience.
I think it's a really profound concept that you have brought out about learning to trust that higher power, right? So what you experienced was real life. Other people's experiences are real. They absolutely are. But without the trials, you really are not experiencing the full range of what this mortal life is about, I believe. And so in some ways, it's interesting when you finally have that experience, which of course you had younger than you could consent to. But when somebody has lived a little longer with everything working out and then something major happens, it can really rock their foundation to where someone who believed in God doesn't even believe in God anymore, right? It can really skew how somebody sees their life, as if their life wasn't real, and now they're in this vortex of who knows what it is. But I think what you are bringing out here is this awareness in me that you can have a hard experience when you're young that introduces you to what this fallen world actually is. Because I think a lot of times in our faith, and not that this is not inappropriate, but in our faith, we often want the Garden of Eden, like in perpetuity. Like we never leave the garden. Everything grows. Adam's good looking, right? Everything works the way it's supposed to. It's perfect temperature all the time. But that was never the permanent place, right? That was a temporary place that they then had to leave in order to learn and grow and experience what life really is. And yet I think it's a harder experience, but I think it's also a richer experience. What, I don't know. Would would you agree with that at all? Does that sound like rubbish?
I mean, I think like at just the way that life is, like at any point in someone's life, they're going to have to struggle aggressively with something or experience some form of grief or loss or whatnot. Um, but yeah, I think it also becomes a problem. Like, I think I was taught a lot to like prescribe miracles to God, which in turn means that you're prescribing bad events to God, right? Like, if God
Right.
does good, God does the bad to you as well. And so I think that has been a mentality that I've had to kind of sort through. Like you said, like we want to, we want this kind of like perfect Garden of Eden centric, like God just does good for us. And, you know, and I think also in a faith context, really like people, all miracles are prescribed to God, which then in turn is like, okay, well then like, why didn't this happen? Or why didn't this miracle happen or whatnot? And I think we got to release some pressure off of God there. Like we are living life, you know, like we are down here on this earth living life. We can seek help, but there's like no, like, I'm cursing you with this and I'm cursing you with this and I'm going to help you with this and not help you with this type of like dictatorship that I think was always in my head growing up.
Really? Like you felt like God looked at you and said, "Oh, who cares about Kennedy? I'm just gonna hurt her, but I'm going to be all awesome and great to this other person over here." You had
Yeah.
feelings like that?
Oh, I feel like there's so many stories of like I had a Bible study class in high school, and one of the lessons I remember was about basically like I think yeah, like prayers and miracles and blessings and whatnot, and it was just story after story after story of someone who almost died and then they got a blessing or they had a prayer and they survived, and like it was just like an hour and a half of like I was like 16 and I just started like sobbing. Like I just like that, you know, like I think
Yeah.
that narrative of like, okay, well, here's 12 examples of, and my father, obviously there was a lot of prayers, had a blessing, like all of that stuff did not survive. So I think that does feel a little personal when you're taught from like a very young age, like, look, this worked and this worked and this worked. And then you're like, well, why didn't my miracle, why didn't this work for me? I think that
Right.
feels personal in a sense, or like vengeful almost. Yeah.
Right. Right. It makes God kind of contractual too.
Yeah, which is just not no, I just don't agree with that now, I think, in my
That's a
belief space.
that's a thought I've had too. And actually, I really do believe there are too many times when somebody should have passed away and they didn't because a miracle happened. And there
Right.
are too many times when really that happened.
Yeah, yeah,
You
exactly.
know, that for me, to when I take it all, you know, all together, because there are too many times when it just seems like something bad should have happened and it didn't, or something good happened that seems like it's just a miracle. That for me has given me the feeling that we do have a certain number of days that we really are here on the earth for, you know, and for me that's comforting because I wasn't ready to let go of my husband. He had been sick for a long time, but it was a manageable sick. Except for the last 4 months of his life, he all hell broke loose and he just really spiraled downhill fast. But I had always thought he's got 10, 15 years left in him, no problem. I remember even telling him that probably just a couple weeks before he died. You know, you're gonna live another 15 years. It's gonna be great. Leave me alone. I'm trying to do my homework. That was kind of the context. And, but it would feel meaningless if it was just some arbitrary event that happened. For me, it's more meaningful knowing that he lived absolutely every single day that was meant for him. And I can't answer all the questions of why he's gone and yet other people are still here. But that gives me comfort because it doesn't feel like it's random. It feels like there's some kind of purpose to it, and not just the purpose to hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's definitely something that you feel through grief is, okay, if there's a purpose to it, then really the purpose is for God to just say that he doesn't love me. But I don't think that's true.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree with you completely.
I think you're a remarkably strong woman, and I am so grateful that you have been sharing what you have with me. Is there anything that you would want to share with somebody who is grieving the loss of their dad in a similar situation to what you have had? Someone who, and it doesn't have to be just through death. There are children who grow up without knowing who their dad is, and that's a grief too. Or children who might know they have a dad, he's alive, but they don't know where he is. What would you share with those kids that you think would give them some comfort?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is probably just like really allow yourself to feel your feelings. Like really, like, don't feel ashamed or embarrassed or like I should be over this. I need to get through this. I feel like I had a lot of people say the craziest stuff sometimes.
Let's talk about that a little bit. We can go back to the profound question, but yeah, tell me about some of the wacky things that you've heard people say.
I feel like a lot of it has been like, my mom was remarried or is remarried, got remarried, was remarried. He's a great guy. And he is a great guy. I feel like he's a wonderful guy. Like, I adore him so much. There is, I think, something irreplaceable about having your like actual father. But I think there's just a lot of like throughout my life, a lot of like, well, like at least you have a stepdad, or like it would have been harder if your parents got divorced because like at least your parents still love each other. Like, would have been harder if your dad would have left because at least you knew he cared about you and he was gone. Like, these were just perpetual, I feel like, throughout my whole childhood. Obviously people well-meaning, but like a lot of like invalidation, I think, for how I felt.
They're trying to comfort you by telling you how worse it could be.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of like, well, at least this, at least that, at least this, or like, you're lucky because of this. And you don't feel lucky. And it also just feels like it creates a level of shame, I think, with your feelings of like, oh, I shouldn't feel sad, or I shouldn't feel mad, or, because I should be feeling lucky or blessed, but I don't.
Right.
I feel like a lot of people also like give weird, like just weird comfort that you're just like, that was not comforting. Like, I'm sure my mom maybe she talked about this. I don't know if you asked her this question when she was on there, but like kind of this, like, we'll find somebody else. And I feel like kind of the same way of like, well, you have a stepdad, you know what I mean? Like, you'll be fine.
Right.
And I'm like, but it's just like, okay, it's different. It's different.
And the same way, because people aren't interchangeable chess pieces. People, they are not replaceable, right?
Yeah. And I was gonna say, in the same way that like if your husband just passed, and you'll find somebody else, you're like, okay, first of all, I don't want anybody else right now, and B, like, that doesn't fill the hole or the loss of this other person. And I went all of my life, I think, not all of my life, a lot of my life, kind of having this idea of like, well, my mom can just get a new husband, but like, I can't just get a new dad.
Right.
And having that perspective, and as I've talked to my mom and I've grown up and I've had my own relationships and dated people, and like every person is very different. It means something different to you, and the depth of those relationships or the way you connect with those people is just very different, and it's not like a replaceable type of thing. So I think I've been able to understand that more as I've grown up, but that was kind of my POV like my whole childhood. And I feel like people have perpetuated that by saying a lot of crazy stuff. Or I think even in a spiritual sense, like this kind of like, you'll see them again. And it's kind of like a write-off. And you're like, okay, first of all, I don't even know if I believe that. But B, like, that doesn't help. I'm literally 8. I'm probably not going to see them again until I'm much older. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like, okay, well, I want them now. Like, I would love to have him here for my first prom or my 16th birthday or my college graduation, like these events, even just day to day. Like, I feel like the biggest thing for me was like, you did not ask this question and I'm just like going off on this, but I feel like the biggest thing for me in recent years is like when I have had relationships or breakups or like things with boys, that's when I've always like wanted my dad there the most. And so it just feels like as life evolves, there are like new events that you just kind of crave that fatherly presence in.
Well,
and I think that's across the board. Yeah. If you lost your dad, if he left, if, divorce, whatnot, I think that's kind of similar.
Right. Because Bruce can be there for you as Bruce, or your grandpa can be there for you as your grandpa. But yeah, that piece with your dad it's a special one.
Yeah. I think I've had not a lot. I've had a few lovely men that I feel like have been sent into my life to like be father figures to me, whether that's what my best friend, her dad is so lovely and so special to me and feels like a father to me and somebody that I just feel like was placed in my life to be that for me. And I adore him. I adore Bruce, my grandfathers, but it's just a different connection. I don't know.
I love that you have those men in your life. I really do. I love that. And I mourn with you that that you've had to wait a long, long time to get to have the interaction with your dad that so many of us take for granted.
Yeah.
I do believe it'll come. But I know that doesn't make any
Yeah, but to like you said, to anybody that's dealing with a similar grief, I would just say like really let yourself, I mean, this, really let yourself like just don't feel shame for that. If it's something where you're like, oh, I should be over this, I can't believe I'm doing this again. Like it's okay to feel those feelings. And I think like also being in tune with them and recognizing them and allowing yourself to feel them so that you don't act upon them or let them spread into something bigger than they could be.
That's very good advice. And talk to somebody about those feelings you're having.
Yeah,
I not having the shame, right? There's no
done
shame.
A lot of therapy.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you maybe a hard question, but when have you felt the undeniable love of God for you in your life?
Regarding this situation or just any time in my life?
When have you felt undeniably that God knows you, loves you, not connected to loss and grief, but just you?
Oh, when I have made mistakes, like undeniably, I feel like those are the times when whether those were like large mistakes in my life or being unkind to somebody or whatnot, and like feeling this like touching ability to become better and be forgiven and to move forward. I think that is just the epitome of the undeniable love of God, that he sees you for what you can be and what you are. And as I've done things that like I aren't true to myself or that I haven't been proud of, to know that I am seen by somebody so individually that like knows that that's not me, and that I've been able to like seek connection with him again through those things and to be better.
I love that. Because, even though this happened to you, you're not defined by this. It's a major part of your life, but ultimately you really are, you're Kenadee, right? You are loved. God does love you. He does know you. I'm I'm glad that you've been able to feel that in your life. You deserve it. I think something that we touched on earlier a little bit that I want to just touch on a little bit before we finish is my husband. My first husband was widowed when we met. He had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they had lost their mother. And it was interesting. After we got married, we had 2 children together. And as you've been talking, it's reminded me of those 2 older kids. I always observed them as young children. They were always just a little more gentle, just a little more kind, just a little more aware of others. And my kids who grew up with a more normal type of experience, it took a little longer for me to see those same characteristics in them. Not that they weren't good kids, but there's a depth to that graciousness and empathy that I could observe in my kids who had suffered when they were younger. And then my younger kids, I saw them develop those traits when their dad got sick, and they were similar ages. So I think that's a gift that is really hard won. It's a gift you don't want to receive because of the way it's bestowed. But I do believe it's a gift to walk through life being so much more aware that others suffer and that they need you to love them and to be kind and to be aware and to not say stupid things. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, I think like you said, if it is a gift, it does come with a high price tag. But I think it's something I hope I've been able to like utilize in my life. I think that it's true. I think when you do see younger people, especially that have had a tragedy like that, they're just a little more grounded to the realities of life. And the realities of life are some, joy and beauty and love, but also loss and sorrow and suffering. And I think you're just probably able to tap into those easier. Empathy is easier than sympathy. So I think you're just able to tap into that. And I would hope that everybody would be able to use that for good and to connect with others.
Well, that's what I think we're trying to accomplish here, is to share that there are ways to take grief and make it transformative and make it something that connects us to others rather than isolating us and making us miserable. So let's just end with the question I ask everyone. What do you think it means to grieve well?
I think to grieve well is to let yourself grieve, first of all, to really like I've said multiple times, really let yourself feel. And also, like you just said, I think the whole point of life and the beauty of life itself is connection. Like that is just the most beautifully poignant part of life, is to connect with people and to love people and to just really, really get to know them deeply and form friendships. And I think grieving well, my mom is a great example of that, is allowing yourself to be vulnerable to other people and deepen those connections with others and yourself.
Thank you. That's exactly what you've done tonight. So thank you so much. You are just a beautiful soul. And I am so, so glad that we got to have some time to talk.
Thank you. That's so kind. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.